Ron, can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I was on mute.
Okay.
Can you hear
I
me
think
okay now?
I can hear you. We cannot see you. If that's what your preference is, that's what you're doing.
That's what I'll need to do for now. I'm driving.
Okay, good. All right, so I'm going to hit the record button, everybody, then we'll be on the record. Are you any problems with that?
None.
Good idea.
Record. If I can find the record button. There it is, record meeting. Good afternoon and welcome to the COVID Response Committee meeting for April 27, 2021. I'm Joe Vanover, Commissioner for the Northern District of Platte County. Thank you to our participants for joining in. This meeting is focused on courts and law enforcement. This is the second meeting of the COVID Response Committee. And the purpose is to continue the discussion on how we might use some of the latest federal funds to respond to COVID and to transition our buildings and operations to the post-COVID period. We've had tremendous upheaval in the last year, and we've made many changes. And I think now is the time to continue the discussion of what changes that we've made that we want to keep and expand, how we might improve how county governments and the courts and law enforcement can do a good work for the people, how we can stick with some of the changes that we've done, how we can expand some of the changes we've made, and then also what do we need to do to make this happen? The federal government has decided to push an enormous amount of money into local government all across America. The indication is Platte County will receive about $20 million. The latest we've heard is the first 10 million should be coming in a couple of weeks. And then the second 10 million is supposed to come about a year after that. And the money, if it's going to be spent, needs to be spent by the end of 2024. As it stands right now, we don't have a whole lot of guidance from the federal government other than what the statute says. The statute gives several criteria that we are allowed to spend the money on. One of them, the first criteria that it gives us, the first option for spending the money is to respond to the public health pandemic, COVID-19. And that's what this committee is focused on, is how can we respond to COVID and make some improvements for the operations and the buildings of our county. Kind of where we are in the process, we're still in early stage discussions. We're in the phase of imagining what the post-COVID world is going to look like. In particular for this meeting, courts and law enforcement, and to think about how we can use this enormous amount of money to help us transition to the post-COVID period. I would very much like to thank Judge Tom Fincham for joining us. He's our presiding judge. We have Prosecutor Eric Zond, Dagmar Wood, the commissioner from Southern Platte County, and our presiding commissioner, Ron Schieber, and then a representative from the defense bar, from the civil private bar, Mark Ferguson, and then also Dana Babcock, our director of administration, has joined us. I'd kind of like to pass it around everyone and give everyone a chance to kind of give their 2 cents, to say what they want to say about this topic, and then we'll have some discussion, and then we'll wrap it up. Hopefully, we'll get wrapped up pretty close to about 5 o'clock. So, Judge Fincham, would you like to start us off? You're the one person in the room that can hold me in contempt, so I have to defer to you.
Well, actually, no, you don't. I didn't even know there was a first meeting of this COVID response committee. So I don't know what was discussed last time. So I think, for me personally, I think it would be better for me to let someone else start, and then I'll be glad to jump in when it's my turn. But I don't even know what was discussed last time. So, Mr. Vanover.
Well, how about we turn to Eric Zond?
All right, I'm unmuted now, right?
Yes,
sir.
we can hear you.
All right. Well, again, I just want to say to Joe and all the other commissioners, I'm glad that you've convened this meeting. Thank you for including our input on it. I may have said this at the last meeting, but as I look at this large sum of money that is coming to Platte County, that is supposed to be used on responding to the pandemic, I actually think that one of the best ways to utilize that money would be to look at our buildings, particularly the courthouse, the administration building, and as I think about it, maybe even the resource center, and determine how those buildings ought to be used in sort of the post-COVID environment. There are lots of things that were set up in those buildings that made sense prior to the pandemic, but don't make as much sense now. And if I were doing it, I would say we ought to take those buildings, if necessary, basically tear them down to their outside walls and think about how do we rebuild these things for a way that makes sense now. I know we're thinking about in our office, are there things that used to make sense that don't make as much sense now? I may have said on our last call that over the years, I've gotten multiple requests from employees about whether or not they would be allowed to work from home. And my knee-jerk response to all of those requests in the past was, no, we're not going to get into that. You need to work from the county office. Now that we've experimented with almost a year of people working either largely or at least some from home, I'm more open to that. And we've brought everybody back into the office, and everyone is working primarily from the office, but I allowed every staff member to make a proposal to work on a part-time basis from home when they thought that made sense. And I have received and granted several requests from folks who are working, at this point, nobody's working more than one day from home or 1.5 days from home. But at least for now, for example, while many of our dockets remain online as opposed to in person, it makes more sense, frankly, given our office setup where we don't have private offices for folks. And they're out in the middle of a whole bunch of other people when they're trying to do dockets. It actually is better for them to do that work from home. I have found that for me personally, there are some things that I can be much more productive in the office doing, and there are other things that I can be much more productive doing from home. It depends on what task I have to do at that particular time of the day. So these are things that we ought to be thinking about. And I think it's going to reset societal expectations in general. I think we're going to see this happening both in the private business sphere as well as the government sphere. And so I would urge us to undertake those sorts of, that sort of thinking about what we're going to do on a going forward basis, what work is going to look like, and then redesign our courthouse, our administration building, and maybe even our resource center to allow us to be productive in this new age.
Thank you. I would agree with that. Mark Ferguson, do you want to talk a little bit about what you've seen in courts? Because you visit courts outside of Platte County. You know Clay and some other courts, and have probably seen how courts and law enforcement have changed with COVID. And what do you like about it? And what do you think the future is going to be?
Thanks, Joe. And I'm like Judge Fincham. I'm new to this group. I have seen a lot of change, though, with COVID, with court choosing. Can't see municipal court until April 1st, for example, Zoom, Platte County, and using WebEx. And we have hearings in Jackson County where some judges are WebEx. In two particular divisions, you have to be in person, and another couple other divisions where you just do it by phone. I totally agree with Eric Zahn's idea. I think this is the perfect time to redesign the county buildings. I think particularly in Platte County, I know a study 2-3 years ago, again, Judge Fincham or Mr. Zahn would know about this way better than I, but Platte County was like the second highest or maybe the first highest in per case per judge. So what happens when we get there? Eventually we get a new court division. I think this would be a perfect time to change the facility so that Division 6 that maybe comes in a year, maybe that it comes in 4 or 5 years. I have no clue. But we're not struggling to come up with funds to build that extra courtroom. In regards to technology, the Supreme Court has, even as we phase up in the court system, the Supreme Court has encouraged courts to continue to use technology. I think if the courthouse is changed, perhaps for the different judges, maybe an arraignment room with a huge monitor. I don't know. That's probably something Judge Fincham should input in. But I think my point is, I think you could reconfigure some of our courtrooms. Platte has always been, since I was a prosecutor in the early 90s, it seems like we do building revisions and we come up with these funky courtrooms that are often too small, like Division 3 or Division 4 when you have a crowd of people outside, and sometime Division 5. Now, if you push the virtual court appearances, like I believe our judges are wanting to do, maybe you can get rid of some of that traffic flow. But I recall back prior to COVID where, there were days like Wednesdays and Thursdays where we have people standing in the halls. The courtrooms are full. I think with renovating that building, that is something we could avoid. Put the high traffic areas downstairs, perhaps move the clerk's office, as Joe said, more people working from home, and Eric said that. I don't know the answer, but I see that most other courthouses have a better setup, geographic type of setup or architectural setup than we do. And I do, in summary, think that any type of technology we can use to continue with the court system in the court system should be utilized.
Thanks, Mark. What's the limits that courts are using video conferencing now? Are they doing, what kind of hearings are they doing by video conferencing? Kind of where's the line cut off between it can happen by video conference versus it needs to happen in person? Do you have a sense of that?
I am aware, I haven't done one, but I am aware of actual bench trials, like on civil cases, a divorce, for example, being tried by WebEx. I think most attorneys want to, look their opponent, look at the witness who's cross-examining in the face. But you never know. I have heard that there was one, I don't recall if it was Jackson County or Cass County, but a substantial but not all part of a jury trial was done by WebEx. I can't see how that could possibly work. I see some constitutional issues there. But yeah, it seems like a whole lot of at least civil litigation and then criminal docket calls, if I talk about Jackson and Platte, is being done virtually. Clay County, right. It's just open free for all.
And the weekly work of the court, as far as the criminal courts, is it, how do you have a sense of how much is could continue to be done by video conferencing versus, of course, a jury trial, or probably a jury trial, would need to be done in person. But, court appearances, courts are not just full of jury trials, they're full of lots of other hearings.
I think having me and other attorneys, and no offense, Eric, but as well as prosecutors in that courtroom with our clients is a waste of space and resources. You don't need us there. Judge Fincham could speak more as to how easily these dockets have been handled.
I'm trying to get it on now, but I can't get sound.
Or not.
that Google thing last time. I had
But
to
with
call
the
in on
exception of
phone.
trials or perhaps like a suppression hearing, I don't think there's anything that we can't do virtually.
In order to get this
Um,
report.
Maybe a
You have to
sentencing
put your phone number in?
where the judge might want to send my client to prison, but I'd say
When you answer the
98% of
call-
what I do could be done virtually. I don't,
Yeah, last
me and my
time
client don't need to be in
camera
that building.
worked, but the audio
Yeah.
wouldn't work, so.
I think we're having some technical
difficulties.
difficulties.
Joe, I'll go
So
ahead
there's
and
a way to
chime in
call?
on
Okay.
what we've been talking about so far, because I think this might be a good place for me to do that.
So much for getting out of here.
We've been in all 5 divisions.
No.
We've been doing
Is
a
that-
tremendous amount of work via WebEx. We got the WebEx cameras and the
Yes.
WebEx TVs via OSCA. They paid for the camera setups and the big TVs for each of our courtrooms. We have been doing, and I think we'll probably continue to use WebEx as much as possible, especially for like civil docket calls, criminal docket calls, and things like that, where there's not going to necessarily be a hearing. We've had a number of attorneys say, well, when are y'all going to get back to normal and have a courtroom full of people? Probably not soon, I think is the answer to that. WebEx is going well, and in terms of social distancing, that is currently an issue and will continue to be an issue. The Supreme Court guidelines indicate that in spades. I have the biggest courtroom, and I've said this 100 times to different people. I have the biggest courtroom in the Platte County Courthouse, and I can get 14 people in my gallery socially distanced. That doesn't include maybe 2 or 3 I could get in the jury box socially distanced. So space is at a premium. Division 2, soon to be Judge Hansborough's court. Division 2, I think she can get 12 or 13, but she was in there the other day with a tape measure measuring out exactly 6 feet to get as many people in there as she could. And it's about probably 12 or 13. Division 4, currently Judge Hansborough's court. I think she can get 3 or 4 people in there socially distanced. And Judge Schaefer, hers is a really small courtroom. Judge Schaefer probably, I think he said he can get maybe 8 or 9 socially distanced, and that's it. So I think I can tell you that as a county, we're going to keep doing WebEx as much as we can, as I said, especially for docket calls. I've done a number of trials via WebEx. I've done a couple paternity trials. I haven't done a bench criminal trial yet, but I think one's coming. The bench trials, I put out kind of a administrative guidance for lawyers doing WebEx proceedings in my courtroom, and I think Judge Schaefer did too, that basically gives everybody the lay of the land of what you can expect and what you need to do and what you can't do and things like that, and it really works pretty well. We have gotten, we meaning judges, we have gotten very, very, very good reviews from the lawyers. I would say about 97 or 8% of the reviews we've gotten from lawyers regarding WebEx has been very positive. And quite frankly, the lawyers like it because they don't have to leave their office and drive to the courthouse in bad weather, cold weather, stormy weather, or anything else. They can stay in their office, do their WebEx docket call, and then go back to doing what they were doing at their desk. And he or she doesn't have to worry about driving anywhere. So I think WebEx is going to be with us for quite some time. One of the things I would suggest, if the plan's going to be that we're going to rip it down to the walls and build back, I think either at the courthouse, if possible, or some other location, I think we need to have a facility someplace where we could get a pretty good sized group of people in for like a voir dire. For example, Cass County has I don't want to say brand new courthouse, but newer courthouse. And I've talked to Bill Collins, who's the PJ down there, a number of times, and they have a room, I think it's on the lower level of their courthouse. They can get like 45 or 50 people in there socially distanced for voir dire, which makes a heck of a difference when we're doing it. So I think we need to get something with a bigger space to be able to do voir dire, assuming we're still social distancing, or have a separate room to do voir dire where we get a whole lot of people in there at once. So I would be in favor of that. Whether we need a division 6 or not, I think that's up for debate. But the more population we get in Platte County, I think the more reality that's going to become. Anyway, point being, I think WebEx is probably here to stay. In trials where, well, for example, I've been doing, and so has Judge Van Amberg, we've been doing felony guilty pleas via WebEx, and they've gone very well. However, one of the things I do, and I believe Judge Van Amberg does as well, we want to make sure that we see the guy or woman on video. I want to make sure I can see the defendant, so I don't do audio guilty pleas. And there's an audio feature for WebEx, but I don't do them for guilty pleas. But I think we need a bigger facility, for a large facility for like picking a jury, and then revamping the courtrooms so that either I think we need to revamp them so that they're pretty good sized anyway, so that we have the capability of doing a jury trial in any one of those courtrooms if we would have to. Because right now you'd never in Division 4 you can get a jury in there. Division 3 you could probably in there, but that wouldn't be ideal. And then and Division 5 with Judge Eckold, you could probably do a jury trial down there, but his seating down there are benches, and those could probably get kind of uncomfortable for a jury after a while. But I think we need a larger area, and we need to, if we're going to revamp the courtrooms, let's revamp them so if we can, so that they're all reasonably good sized, in my view. But again, no, I'm beating a dead horse here. WebEx is here to stay, I think, at least in the short run, possibly in the long run. And I think that's a good thing. Not having people come in the courtroom or come in the courthouse, quite frankly, is great as far as stopping the spread of the disease. It's worked very well. And again, to use my courtroom as an example, if I can only get 14 people in my courtroom, it is a security nightmare for the sheriffs at the front door, metering people in and out 14 at a time, because they don't know if somebody's case is going to take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 25 minutes. They don't know. So having the WebEx is a huge benefit, not only for us as judges, but also for the defendants, the plaintiffs' lawyers, defense lawyers, defendants in criminal cases, and our own sheriffs.
And I see the sheriff has joined us. Before we turn it over to the sheriff, which we will in just a minute, Sheriff, but Judge Fincham, could you talk about the experience with, are the inmates appearing by video conference? Are they coming up to the room, or
Nope.
how is
Nope.
that going?
We're doing the in custodies via WebEx. The jail has a WebEx set up downstairs, and we do the in custody people. They do not come up to the court on WebEx in all of our divisions. On Tuesday is criminal day up in divisions 3 and 4. They have that well under control with WebEx, and then I have criminal Thursday. Judge Van Amberg has criminal on Thursday. And what he and I have tried to do is he does his in custodies. I think the jail only has one chair for WebEx. He does his in custodies in the morning. I do mine in the afternoon, so that we don't have to worry about competing against each other for WebEx or bandwidth. But it's working well, and it saves bringing inmates up and downstairs. It saves the security staff from having to do that, and it's more secure because it keeps defendants out of the courtroom.
Yeah.
Judge Fincham, this is Dagmar Wood. Hopefully you can hear me. I
can.
wanted to ask you a follow-up question on the WebEx, and maybe,
Sure.
I don't know if Eric Zond or Sheriff Owen would want to chime in as well, but the Department of Corrections does not have WebEx, is my understanding. So I was wanting to know what your opinion is of us maybe pushing for DOC to get that, how helpful that would be, if it was be a game changer staff-wise with our sheriff's office.
I can answer that question for you as far as the DOC. The DOC, we are told, matter of fact, the Presiding Judges Association, or the presiding, I shouldn't say association, but the presiding judges have been, for lack of a better term, pushing DOC to get WebEx facilities in all their facilities. Some have them, many do not. If they don't have a WebEx set up, there's a way that we could do basically an arraignment if we needed to by a long distance phone call. Some of them have been willing to do that. Others have indicated that until they get WebEx, they're not doing anything unless we writ somebody in, and we can do that. But we weren't writting in people for quite some time due to COVID, because I think everybody knows that a lot of the DOC facilities were hotspots for quite some time. That has calmed down a little bit. But the DOC says they're working on getting a WebEx set up for all their facilities. I think the one in Cameron has one. I think the one in Chillicothe has one. And I think St. Joe has one too, because that is also the Western Reception and Diagnostic Center, or whatever they call it. So I think they have one, but not all of them do. And There's a money problem, we're told, finding the funds to get this done. And then also with the COVID cases, the way they were some time ago, there was a problem getting people physically in the correctional facilities to get the WebEx hooked up and installed, because they didn't want, the DOC people and OSCA people didn't want to put their people in a COVID hotspot, and I don't blame them. But to answer your question, Dagmar, yes, they are working on it, and I'm hoping they will get it sooner rather than later.
I can add a little bit to that as well. I've had a conversation with the general counsel for the governor about that, and he assures me that it's a priority of the governor's office to get every prison facility on WebEx. So we'll see what that actually means, but at least I've had the conversation, and they view it as a priority. I also want to go back and add something to what Judge Fincham said. I agree 100% that we need large spaces for Dyer and larger courtrooms for jury trials. I do think this, though. I think, it's rare that Platte County has more than one trial going on at any time. Occasionally, we have had two. It is if we're going to keep many of our dockets online as opposed to in person as well, I wonder if there's a way that we can have courtrooms of varying sizes, some that are large for jury trials, others that are really small just for contested hearings and things like that. My preference, honestly, on a going forward basis, I would love to see dockets remain online in perpetuity, and trials and contested hearings be in person, because I think it's easier and often faster for those things to happen in person. But if we had a variety of sizes of courtrooms that maybe weren't even assigned to individual judges, they would be assigned based on what was happening, might make more sense than the model we've got right now, where every judge has a courtroom assigned to him or her. Again, I don't have the answers to these questions. I just think these are the sorts of questions that we ought to be asking ourselves now.
Right. That's a good point. I think since the sheriff has joined us and we've talking about DOC, Sheriff, could you kind of tell us what impact that would have on on your operations if the Department of Corrections was able to have their inmates appear in a Platte County court without actually physically coming to the Platte County courthouse? And then just chime in with anything else that you want to add to this meeting. We really do appreciate you joining us.
Well, I appreciate that. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're coming through just fine.
It would benefit us greatly as the county, for the jail population, not to have to bring these writs back and all of this other stuff. I mean, we get day or two transportation costs. We have to go pick them up, put them in a hotel, or we go down, drive down today, get in a hotel tonight, pick them up at 6 o'clock in the morning, drive back tomorrow. And they're here for 2 days to 14 days, depending upon the writ, or longer if it's continued, just to turn around and have them answer a few questions or make a statement, and then right back the other way. We're back another 2 days on transportation. So one, it would reduce the transportation cost. And number two, it would, I believe, allow the judge more flexibility on some of these writs and stuff. Because I mean, right now we've had to vet every one of these as to, can we go get them, and how many day trip is it, and where's it at? And the courts have been wonderful to work with, but in this situation, it's not been good. And it also has a direct impact on jail population when you get these people stacked in here on writs. So it would do that. One thing that Mr. Vanover and I talked about, though, was the WebEx. I'm a big fan of. And we were kind of kicking around. We have, and the judge mentioned before, we have one WebEx system right now. I possibly could get a second one into maybe where the ICE equipment was at. And I need to talk to commissioners about ICE at a later time anyway, but possibly. But one of the things we had talked about was I don't know what it would cost, but But knowing that this is the future, we're wanting to do things in perpetuity. They're wanting to do more with this in the courtrooms. Would it behoove us to spend money to build just a small addition room on the backside of booking here that's secure, maybe behind booking or right behind where the building, the room to the south of that is currently the storage area. It's not, it's the, where all the personal property for the inmates go and all of that. Would it behoove us to build a room in there that we could get several divided rooms in there that are concreted up and safe, and get in 3 or 4 WebEx systems into that room where we could do video arraignment. They can do more of the attorney-client visitation and have their conversations over the WebEx or Zoom. Right now, we just don't have a way to do all of that, or we have to either physically schedule it, or the attorneys have to try and work around the schedule to get here, to where if they set this up on WebEx, we had a chair say, okay, Mr. Ferguson at 10 o'clock wants to talk to his client, Billy Bob. At 10 o'clock, we bring Billy Bob down, stick him in the room, close the door, and let him have his conversation with Mr. Ferguson. But it saved me a trip to the courtroom. It saved me a whole lot of stuff, or it saved me to a visitation area. And it also is a safety situation that I don't have other people coming in and out of the jail. So that's one area that we've really kicked around is how would we expand on WebEx? If we're going to go forward and we believe technology is where we're going to go, and we need to make some way somehow to have a place to use that technology above and beyond the one system that we currently have.
Mark, do you want to chime in? Are you visiting clients while they're in custody and while you're sitting in your office?
I think I have visited 2, and I don't recall the deputy's name. We scheduled it, and it took him several days to schedule it. The majority of my visits, I have come up there, physically been there. But I think I speak for every attorney I know. If we could have these virtually, which would be better for the sheriff's department, would also be better for us. I'm not driving 20, 25 minutes to Platte City from Northtown, or 15 minutes from my house.
I can tell everybody in the federal system, there's lots of video conferencing going on between attorneys and clients. And I'll be at home or in the office and talking to a client, that's in another holding facility somewhere. And the federal facilities seem to have jumped on it pretty quick. There are scheduling issues. If I want to talk to someone who's in Leavenworth, it might be a week out before I can get an appointment, and it might be 4:30 on a Friday. But it saves drive time. If my client's in Butler, Missouri, I don't have to drive 3 hours to get down there. I can just do a video conference.
Well,
Plus, I think it benefits the sheriff's department, because anytime I come there, the sheriff has to go send a deputy to get my 2 or 3 clients. Maybe they're in different pods. Then they bring them down the hall. Maybe somebody has to walk them back. They have to babysit them. If I can just plug them in on a TV or a monitor, I think it's better for us, but it's also better for the county.
I think it might be better for litigants also. If the litigant is, say, in Oklahoma on a civil case, they don't have to drive all the way to Platte City, Missouri to appear in court.
Well, my other question would be, and Mr. Zahn maybe can answer or help on it, but if I'm holding an inmate and he has got a case at Clay County and we had WebEx, instead of them having to continue this case or do whatever in Clay County, could we virtually let him get on and do the case in Clay County, which would turn around and the end of it reduce my hold time, especially if it's out of the area. Let's say you're going to, St. Louis County. If they could dispose of that other charge or have that arraignment while he's here, and then the judge turns around 3 days later here and says, okay, you've satisfied, you're ready to go. Then I got up to a 10-day window to hold this guy before St. Louis can come get him. I got an inmate for 10 days that I don't need. And if this would work across the different places as this continues to expand, it would be a huge help. And it would also be a huge help on transportation, because if I got an inmate that the judge wants to talk to there again, in Jefferson City, and Judge Fincham wants to talk to him or wants to do something in his courtroom or question or whatever, I now don't have a whole day's travel time for two deputies going down there and back for a 15-minute conversation. So I think there's a huge future here. It's just how we get it developed, but I have to have a place big enough. Seems like space is an issue, but I have to have a space big enough that I can get several people in doing different things at the same time that are divided safely to get that done. And I currently don't have that space in the facility. We do have, if it was a smaller room, I think we've got room to come off the back right here in the corner without affecting the entryway to the sally port and stuff like that, that we could make a virtual room, for the lack of a better description, to try and do that. So
I think
that would be my conversation about the WebEx and the video.
I think that's a good possibility for Eric or Judge Fincham to talk about. If, as we know, a lot of our inmates have problems in other counties, and it might be Clay County or Jackson County or Cass County, or it might be St. Louis. Is that a real possibility of, let's say there's an inmate in Platte County who has court, can they do a court appearance in Clay County or St. Charles County while sitting in the Platte County jail, but do it by a video conference?
In my opinion, we ought to make that a goal. I don't know whether it's possible today, but it's certainly, we should figure out a way to make it possible in the future. And again, I will tell you, based on my conversation with Andrew Bailey, the general counsel for Governor Parson, he's really interested in these sorts of things, primarily from a perspective, but also from a county to county perspective as well. And I believe, based on what we're seeing from the Missouri Supreme Court and their committee, they've got a committee or task force on virtual proceedings, and they're rewriting some of the rules and things like that. Daryl Moore, who is the executive director of the Prosecutors Association, serves on that body, and I've talked with Daryl a lot about it. There's a movement toward all of this stuff. And I think there's an appetite for it, and we need to jump on board with that, and hopefully even be leaders in that movement, in my opinion.
Judge, do you want to comment on that possibility of people that have issues county to county, but instead of treating them in sequence, where they sit in the Platte County jail for a few days and get that dealt with, and then they go to Clay and they sit for a few days to get that dealt with before they go to the next one?
I think it's a great idea. If I have a defendant who's in Clay County and the attorney has a plea agreement worked out with the prosecuting attorney's office, I'd love to be able to do that guilty plea while the guy's in Clay County, so we don't have to worry about shipping the guy over. I mean, that would be a great result for everybody. And let me go back to Ritz. So point being, yes, I think it's a great idea. I join in that. And the other thing that I'm doing on Ritz, and I think the other judges are too, we've gotten several requests from several attorneys, private attorneys, about written people in. And what I've tried to have my clerk do is find out why they want to writ them in. I mean, if they want to writ them in just to talk to them, I mean, that's a lot of manpower for a conference. If they want to writ them in for a guilty plea, I get that. But I've tried to figure out, or try to have my clerk figure out, why they need to be writted in here anyway. And if we can avoid writting people in, and I'm not trying to say we're not trying to jerk around the defendants, but if we can avoid writting people in for not very good reasons, we're going to try to do it. For the manpower reason, the COVID reason, all that, all rolled into one.
Yeah. Sheriff, we kind of talked about just one thing related to law enforcement. Anything else you'd like to add on how we might be able to use some of the latest federal funds to transition to the post-COVID period? Well,
I think the opportunity is there to get in front of this HVAC system, number one. The system's 21 years old, but it's all interconnected. So our biggest fear was, if we got COVID in the facility, if it was airborne or anything else that was airborne, how did I keep it out of the adjoining pots? I mean, I can isolate a person in a specific cell, but the air intakes, everything through that whole jail are all interconnected to the rest of the building, including the dispatch center and the law enforcement center. So a perfect example of that was when, and Miss Wood will remember, we had a fire down in the jail, down in the laundry room. The smoke turned around, came out, everybody was fine, but we were in the process of having to evacuate the communications center because of the smoke volume that was being sucked out of the jail into the communications center and the rest of the building. So, my concern is that one, for COVID related or anything that would be airborne, whether it be fire, whether it be COVID or anything, now would be the time to try and address the HVAC system and get these things on separate systems to where we don't have a problem. And the other question I would have, or the point I would make is in today's world, the vulnerability right now, that HVAC system for this whole jail is huge, because if you come up the back stairs for the back employees entrance between the courthouse and Mr. Zahn's, the air intake is at ground level right there for the whole facility. So a half a can or a can of pepper spray we can take out this whole place, communication center, law enforcement center, and be trying to figure out what the hell to do with all the jail and all the stuff there, whether it's that or smoke but for safety purposes, especially COVID, this was our biggest fear, was how do we keep this isolated and go to, some of those cells in there need to go to a positive ventilation, to where if you have somebody that has an illness, is there a way to vent that air outside and keep it? And I know jails throughout the state, there are a few that have those, and the newer ones. But that's something that I really would like us to see us consider is let's get us out of the vulnerability that we can wipe everything out with one small thing. And that's at the same time not something that, the county's wanting to maintain the facility, and we're wanting to keep the jail, and we're not wanting to add or redo, but that is going to be a major expense down the road when that system has to be replaced as 20 or 21 years old. So why not fix it now and do it right for the safety purposes of the COVID and all of that, and try and save having to go back to taxpayers later down the road to come up with millions of dollars or whatever that system would cost to fix. So I'm just throwing it out there, but it's huge.
Yeah. Ron Schieber, do you want to?
If Sheriff Owens,
or go ahead. Judge, go ahead.
Okay, if Sheriff Owens done, I'd like to chime in on HVAC. At probably the middle of last year, when we knew we were going to be getting some COVID money, I talked to Daniel Erickson, the facilities guy, who's a great guy to work with, by the way, about getting HEPA filtration systems for our ventilation system in the courthouse. He checked on it and he said it was going to be tremendously expensive. And he didn't say it probably wasn't going to happen. He said it wasn't going to happen, which is when we started buying the HEPA filter machines for all our courtrooms, the clerk's office, my office, the other judge's office, and things like that. So if we're going to have a pretty decent amount of money, we need to think about either replacing the whole system, or retrofitting it with HEPA filters and stuff like that to keep out exactly what we're trying to keep out now, which is COVID, other airborne materials that the sheriff was talking about, pepper spray, tear gas, all that other kind of stuff, if we can, and just redo the whole HVAC system if we're able to do that, or put a whole new one in, or retrofit. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, thank you. Ron Schieber, I want to give everybody a chance to say a little bit. And Ron, I don't think we've had you. Do you want to take a moment and talk about your thoughts on what we might be able to do with this latest round of federal money to respond to COVID and transition operations, what we need to focus on, what we need to think about?
Glad to, Joe. You asked for our 2 cents in the beginning. Some people don't think what I have to say is worth 2 cents. So you're going to get your 2 cents worth. So I'm very excited about this conversation, because I think what you all are talking about are the exact things that the commission has been discussing. And I'm going to try to summarize maybe just what I think we should look at and approach to this. And I know each of you have mentioned this, but we've got to look at how our people operate. And I think we have to look at that from the standpoint of how do our taxpayers and our constituents want to do business with us. And, you know, that includes those people that are within the system to be prosecuted, tried, as well as people like Mark and the folks in the bar that are there. So, you know, I think when we look at our people, and Eric Zahn mentioned it, if we can free up space in the building by giving people some work at home opportunities, that then may take us to the next part of the planning, and that is, how do we best use our space? And just a couple of thoughts. I mean, when we go to something that Eric talked about in the court system, if we look at that same concept in the entire building and say, what's it look like to have what I call flexible / shared space versus dedicated space? You know, I can just tell you when we had air quality issues in the prosecutor's office and they moved into the commission space, you know, that freed up a ton of space. And we've had no negative feedback that the commission doesn't have offices within that building. You know, I had somebody ask me the other day, well, who do you meet? Where do you meet with your people? And I said, I meet with them where I met with them before. I may have had 5 or 6 meetings in my actual office up there. Most of my meetings, you know, they're at coffee shops or meetings or at people's houses or on the phone. So, you know, I think there's a way to look at how our people work and being flexible with where they work and how they work to actually free up that flex space that then allows for a large space. I'm going to say this word wrong, verdoir, where you can have where you can vet your jurors, because you don't.
I'll just jump in. There's no wrong way to say that word because nobody knows how to say it anyway.
Okay, very good. So you know, when we look at the large spaces that we could create with good work at home policies, I think that's one of the solutions. And so, you know, I think we need to look at those shared versus dedicated spaces, because you don't need a large space every day of the week for jury selection. And we certainly don't need a large space every day of the week for commission session. And for the most part, I think we could work around that. There's other meetings that are held. We have a space at the resource center and we have a space at the commission room that are really for the same reason. And, you know, I think those larger open shared spaces is something we should look at. The next thing I'll talk about, and again, these are just my thoughts based on what I've heard so far in our discussion. Technology is a great thing. And whether we're talking about a better records process, electronic records process where we don't have to have futures full of a bunch of stuff, where maybe we could repurpose futures for some of that shared space or something else, because we're able to take some steps to actually electronically file that stuff. And I know we still need places for Mark and Eric and the judge to keep their actual physical evidence, but paper records are a thing of the past. And the second thing about technology, and I'm going to give you an example that's not law enforcement related, but is public access to those records. If we're going to ask people from home, and I say public and employee, if we're going to ask people to work from home and have a good work at home policy, I think we need to make sure they have good access to records. And the way to do that is electronically, like the business world is doing now. The fourth area that I'll talk about is the money, and it's $20 million. And I want to say, we want to make sure that we take this opportunity and make sure we do what's best for the taxpayers and for the office holders and for our directors and our departments. And so I love the idea of replanning how our building looks from a space standpoint, how our people work, from a resources standpoint and a productivity standpoint. But I would really like to make sure we are focused on one-time expenses that at a minimum are revenue neutral from an operations standpoint. But I believe it's also possible to use these funds to save operations costs. So similar to what Mark was talking about, of moving prisoners around is expensive. Well, technology can help with that. I bet there's other places in the building where we're doing stuff that, we can, benefit from what we've learned about COVID. Things like, again, this is still on the space and the technology. I believe and I commend all of you. I know that Judge Fensham, Sheriff Owen, Eric Zahn, Mark Ferguson, you folks that are on the ground in law enforcement and public safety, I don't pretend to know much about it. What I can say is through COVID, I think we kept our jail population down. I believe we have all the space that the county's going to need for decades if it's properly managed. And I don't know what the legislative issues are to keeping our jail population down so we don't have to do something real soon with jail. I don't know what it looks like to, move people through the system faster. I know one of the things I've heard from some folks at the public defender's offices, it'd be nice to have some space for public defenders where they could come and help move people through the jail. So I think jail population is something that, can also be addressed with this, because that long term seems to be to work. The last resource I'll talk about is time. And, we've already talked about, how do we give people access so that they can be more efficient, do their job? How can we make sure the public has what they need from us and do business the way the public wants to do business? We've talked about the technology and we've talked about the money. The last thing I'll say about the money before we go to time is the commission is still committed to our small business community, and they're the ones that have been drastically impacted by the shutdown. We don't have any guidance yet, other than, like Joe said, the actual legislation. We're expecting to receive some administrative rules when the money actually comes in. If possible, we may allocate some of this funds to help our small business community like we did with the first 12 million. But I think they're on equal playing fields, making the county more efficient, less costly, utilizing the space to keep us within the footprint. That's equally as important, I believe, in the long term as those small business grant opportunities that may be available. And then just simply from a time standpoint, we all have a limited amount of time. And I think Mark Ferguson probably said it best. If he can save 25 minutes not driving from North Kansas City to the courthouse to do a client meeting, we can take that to a lot of areas in our building as long as we are thinking ahead. And, when we look at the technology available, when we look at the space issues, I'd like it to kind of be an open book as far as how are we going to do business the way the county residents want to do business and be more efficient, less costly long term. And I think this is a great opportunity to do that. So I applaud each of you for your thoughts on this, because I don't think I added anything new other than I'm fully supportive of let's study this issue and really get a good game plan together.
Thanks, Ron. And I know we might be having some technical difficulties. Sheriff Owen has texted me that he's still on the phone, but the web kicked him off. And then I saw Dagmar Wood just got off. Rob Willard, are you still there? Do you want to chime in your 2 cents?
I am still here. What I will say about the money, if everybody can hear me okay, it is my understanding that the money's going to be distributed in two waves. The first wave, I believe, will hit the bank on May the 10th of this year. And still waiting for more regulations and more guidance. I know there is a certain window of time to spend a certain amount of money. I know that I believe the total time limit to spend the money is 3 years. So what we're taking a look at is $10 million expected May 10th, 2021, and the next $10 million coming about a year after that. So with all the planning and the discussions, obviously that's gotta feed into it as to which plans we're going to work on and which things we're going to do in a certain order. That's just from the funding standpoint, and that's just about all I have to offer. I learned the May 10th day today, and that was something that another treasurer in another county had heard from Mac. I have not received anything from Uncle Sam yet, specifically on a date.
Yeah, along those lines, I think it was last week, the Treasury Department issued us something that said money's coming, and then at the bottom of the press release it said guidance is coming in the coming weeks. So we're still at early stages of discussing what to do with this, but I think it's worth it to talk about it now, and hopefully in the coming weeks the federal government will give us some more guidance on what it can and cannot be spent on. I see Dagmar Wood is back. If you're back, Dagmar, we're happy to turn it over to you.
I got something to say real quick, and then I got to go. So.
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Sheriff. One of
the things, and I'm sorry for cutting in here, but I've got another meeting shortly. But one of the things that I did not yet bring up, and my understanding in that money is lost revenue, and I think just to put it out on the table. I'm not talking about tax money. You took a hit now for over a year on your inmate boarding and prisoner board stuff bills in here to the tune, I'm guessing, and I'd have to go do the calculations, but probably close to $500,000 last year, and then whatever so far this year, that if that is in fact able to make up for lost revenue, that money would go back into the county budget that is currently planned as a revenue line for some of it. But I just throw that out. I understand. I mean, we had $12 million to help the first round and help the businesses and do that. But somewhere in here, I think we need to take care of home and get the building straightened out and not hit the taxpayers for millions of dollars down the road when we had the opportunity to do some of it now. So. And I agree with Ron. I mean, I'm not trying to disagree with Ron either. I think we're going to have to do due diligence on this, though, of at the end of the day, what works best short term, but what works best long term for the county.
And I think the sheriff makes a very good point. When we take a look at revenue numbers, there's a lot of focus on the top line number of general revenue and the use tax. And last year, because of the extraordinary increase in the use tax, as well as the use tax remaining very high, the top line number didn't show a dramatic decline in revenue. But if you take a look at the road sales tax and the park sales tax, along with other fees and other lines of necessary revenue for services that the sheriff was alluding to, I think the roads tax took about a $500,000 hit. Parks tax might have been in the range of $600,000 to $700,000. So I believe that should be part of the discussion and asking ourselves what services were we not able to provide in 2020, both due to a hit in revenue, but also the COVID situation. And I haven't been able to get too far in the weeds with our other jurisdictions and other districts. But I mentioned that in the last meeting, but I'm glad the sheriff brought it up here.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Sheriff. Are you there, Dagmar?
I think I am. I'm having some technical difficulties.
We can hear
you
you.
hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
My Wi-Fi's been spotty, and I apologize in advance if my corgis chime in. They tend to want me to get my money's worth out of them in these meetings. So anyway, there's probably not a lot that's that everything's pretty much already been said. We spend 6 months out of the year planning on our budget every year and going through that exercise, and rightfully so. But I believe that space is an asset to be actively managed as well. And I think this is a great opportunity for us to look at the big picture and do it more efficiently, for the benefit of not just our citizens, but also our offices, departments, our employees. There's quality of life issues for employees, for those that can possibly maybe work at home full-time or part-time, and what we can do to facilitate that. Flex space has already been mentioned. Looking at that at both Platte City and the Resource Center, and what needs to be done to support our employees that want to work at home. Do we need some, IT support there? So I think everything's already been said, but I'm looking forward to looking at ways to maximize how we go about doing business in the next 10, 20 years in the county, and utilizing these funds in the most efficient manner to set us up for the long term. So thank you very much. I really, really appreciate everybody spending, their afternoon helping us to kind of spitball and troubleshoot these really important ideas.
Thank you, Dagmar. I think we're about at the point of the last call. Did I miss anyone? Does anyone else want to chime in with something?
Hey, Joe, I just want to ask a question.
Yes.
And maybe this is for you. This meeting's been very helpful for me, and I appreciate you leading this charge. I think you're on this commission at just the right time. You have a good understanding of the criminal justice system, law enforcement, public safety, and you're also a good commissioner. So I appreciate you leading the charge on this. What do you feel is our next step in the process now that we've had this call? I'll just listen offline.
Yeah, I think the next step for the commissioners, I think, is to put together some guiding principles for how we can use the federal funds. And I think we might be able to do that. We've started some preliminary discussions of what kind of guiding principles we want to give to the department heads and to the office holders on how we can and should use the federal funds. If we work hard at it, it's possible the May 10th meeting of the office holders, we might be able to release those guiding principles from the three of us, from the three commissioners. The next big event, though, the next big day in this process is going to come when the Department of Treasury issues their federal guidance. And, that will really govern how we spend the money. So right now we're doing some preliminary discussions. We've seen the statute that says we can spend it to respond to COVID. Personally, my priority is to respond to COVID by transitioning government buildings and government operations to the post-COVID period. I understand there's lots of needs in the community, but my priority is our buildings and our operations. But I think going forward, probably the next two things would be if the commission can get together with some guiding principles, then we can see what the federal government says are the hard guidelines on what the money can be spent on. So I'll open it up again to last call. We're a little bit past 5. Anybody else want to say something before we shut down the meeting?
The only thing I would bring up was, if we think we're going to go down this path, I don't know that it would cost me anything to get, I think we had Trainer during the last jail. Trainer was our architect on her with the jail thing, but it would not probably cost me anything to get them up here to try and scope out what
an addition would cost for that room or something like that, at least to start getting some preliminary costs. And I think we probably wouldn't hurt to get some preliminary cost on what's it going to cost for HVAC and what's it do. I mean, nothing says we have to do it. And I'm not saying hire anybody you got to pay as a consultant. That's why I say trainer probably come do it for nothing, but for that part. And I think, you know, whether you can get an HVAC company or somebody to do the same or not, but at least start plugging some of these numbers down to where we're not 3 or 4 more months later trying to get a ballpark idea of what the costs are. And then if they exceed the certain amount, then we're going to have to prioritize whatever the commission wants to do for projects.
Yeah, I think it's definitely time for us to start imagining the post-COVID world and how we want our buildings and operations to look. And I think we're getting pretty darn close to the time where we start getting some numbers. Like what you're saying, Sheriff.
Well, I think if you do that, you want to push out more for these people working at home. You're going to have to do more for your backbone on your IT. If you're going to do this long term, especially you start pulling records and opening up the access to the public and to be there, fiber is going to have to come into the resource center instead of the DSL lines that are coming to make a list.
Yeah.
And to support the projects that they
Time to think big and start making some lists, because it's a ridiculous amount of money that the federal government is pushing out to local governments all across America. I mean, that's a decision that was made. It's going to happen. And I think we have an opportunity to use it for the good.
Well, I think some of those things are going to cost a little more money than you think they will too. I don't know what that HVAC system costs, but
yeah,
it's not going to be cheap by the time you try and do several buildings.
Right. So just pass it around. Judge Fincham, anything else to add, Judge?
Nothing further from me. It's been a great discussion.
Thank you. Eric Zahn, anything?
No, just again, thank you, Joe, Ron, and Dagmar for inviting the other office holders to be a part of this.
Mark Ferguson from the private lawyers.
I have nothing further. Thank you for inviting me as well.
Thank you. Dagmar?
Nothing. This was a good meeting. Thank you very much for your leadership, Joe. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Anything else, Rob Willard?
Nothing here.
All right, for everybody, timing, again, as soon as we get the federal guidance, I'm sure we'll put together another one of these meetings. It might be the broader group where we focus on everything that we can do at county government in response to COVID. This one has really been focused on courts and law enforcement. But for the next meeting, just so you have that in mind, I'm not sure when that guidance is going to come out. If it takes too long, we might set up another one of these meetings. But hopefully we can get the federal guidance and then read that, and I can distribute it, and then we can get together again and talk about it after that point. All right, thank you so much, everybody, for joining in. This is a very important conversation. It's good that we're keeping the ball.
I want to thank all the commissioners and everybody for
on behalf of the court. It's nice to have a seat at the table. So
we very much like having you here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Of the COVID Response Committee.